everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on international trade. We have our world famous speaker, Mr. Donald, and Ma'am Rebecca. First, I would like to give chance, Mr. Donald. Mr. Donald, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, good morning. Yeah, I'm just trying to convert. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, good. I was converting to the headphones today, but my Bluetooth isn't working quite right, so I'm just going to shut these off. Try it the other way. So you want me to say something about international trade? Uh-oh, he's frozen. Hi, Rebecca. I haven't met you yet.
Yes.
Hi.
So,
Mr. Donald,
well,
can
I'm
you
a
hear me?
proponent of international trade. I think it's basic economics. When you first learn economics, you learn about what's called comparative advantage. And the idea of comparative advantage is that some countries are better at doing things than other countries are. And the example they give in the one time most popular economics text was that the Germans are good at making bread and the French are good at making wine. Of course, the French are actually pretty good at making bread too, but this is just an example. And so if the French make bread that's not as good as the Germans and the Germans make wine that isn't as good as the French, and it costs the French more to make the bread because they're not as good at it, and it costs the Germans more, then it doesn't really make sense for the Germans to make wine and the French to make bread. Instead, it makes more sense for the Germans to buy their wine from the French and the French to buy their bread from the Germans. And a more modern example is that the United States has hasn't been able to make memory chips as cheap as they can make them in Taiwan. The fab factories are really, really good in Taiwan, and they're not as good in the United States. It's a lot more expensive for us to make certain kinds of semiconductors than it is memory. I mean, of course, the United States is better at making CPUs. So the Intel CPUs they're made all over the world, but the United States kind of knows how to make the best CPUs. So if the United States starts making memory chips and they buy they make their own memory chips, that wind up being more expensive than the memory chips that they would get from Korea, then if they build something using those memory chips, it's going to be more expensive than somebody who uses the Korean memory chips. And so therefore, it's unwise business decision to do that. And so international trade ultimately in the end, in theory, works out better for everyone. I mean, that's the theory, but of course there's difficulties when we start trading with labor, for an instance, and some country has very, very inexpensive labor, and another country the labor is more expensive. But in the country with the more expensive labor, people still have to work. And so if we basically outsource the work to some other place, there's always the potential of a difficulty of people not having enough work in one country and more work in the other country. And so it isn't as cut and dried. Ricardo was the name of the person who came up with the idea of comparative advantage about the same time as Adam Smith wrote Wealth of Nations, which was about the same time as the American Revolution. So it's pretty old theories. And so that's kind of just the high level view of international trade. And so I'm going to listen to what Rebecca has to say, and then we'll go back and forth and try and entertain people for a little while.
Excellent. Madam Rebecca, yeah.
Yes. So I was taught business by a billionaire in my 20s. And I'm echoing. Can you hear that echo? I can't hear myself now.
Madam Rebecca, it's
Okay.
fine.
Okay, I can hear it now. Okay. So I was taught business in my 20s by a billionaire. So I'll be 50 this year. And so the way that he taught me business was by unlearning everything I learned in business school. So it was a challenge for me, but he had this self-sustaining business idea. And that's the way we ran his organizations. But even though he would do a lot of international trade from a young age, my perspective on it was, why can't we have a melting pot, which that may be where America's headed. I don't know, that's my theory, but why can't each country make their own things and supply what everybody in their country needs at each given moment? But you could break that down into a community, more like a self-sustaining community. Hey, what's the best of the best, instead of having, 8 burger restaurants in one, 5-mile radius? What's the best of the best that's going to fuel this economy for this city or this country? And everybody make the best of the best in each area. So my mind thinks differently, but I hear what you're saying, Donald, because that's the way it's always been, especially when you come down to the labor part of it, because of the way our money is valued is different. So if my money is valued, 1 to 1 versus, 1 to 80 cents or 1 to 40 cents, or, you get into the more of the African money and it's almost worthless. So it's like their value is no less than my value. It's just our money that says it's so, kind of thing. So how we fix that from a younger generation, I don't know. I have kids that are in their 20s. So I think of, oh gosh, we got to hurry up and fix this before, things go any further. I love being able to buy things from other countries. I love that. I love the cultural aspect of things. But I think at some point we've got to learn to be more resourceful in our trading, especially with all the government regulations and tariffs and those types of things. I don't know enough of the language of those, but I do know that it's so much more expensive to drive a Mercedes here, and in other countries a Mercedes is a taxi. So it's like, here nobody really wants to drive Ford and Chevy, but in other countries that's a luxury. And to me that's just fascinating, because it's just because of the value that we put in the money that it cost, but it always comes down to the labor part of it.
Well, I'd be interested in hearing more about what you're talking about, and kind of, I don't feel that I completely get what you're saying, but I think it's funny, the idea of things that are luxuries. I lived in Finland for a while, and it just was hysterical to me that one of their favorite beers, that was their biggest luxury beer, even though they had all these German beers and English beers and all these great beers, the luxury beer was Budweiser. And I'm like, what? It's like they talked about their own beer, Finnish beer. They said it was reindeer piss. And it didn't.
Oh, wow.
It was so bad. But Budweiser, as far as I'm concerned, was actually no different at all. But oh well. Some of it's psychological. You know, in the reality of it is we don't have all the heavy metals we need to be able to make some of the things that we need to make. And so for some things, we're stuck importing it. We really have no choice. However, the conditions where the heavy metals are basically dug out of the earth in places like Africa and things like that are horrendous. I mean, you know, people just work in these mines and die young, and they make nothing from it. They live in, you know, squalor. And so the solution in a way is the idea that we somehow have a more global world where we come up with ways that when we're influencing another place, we do it in some sort of ethical way. I don't see that happening anytime soon, because the way that capitalism works is the only criteria is money. And so the damage that they do to people's lives, and we could take it even just looking at the United States and not the world in general. Corporations would, you know, fight as hard as they can to pay as little as they can and cause, you know, have the worst working conditions. Whatever they can do to make more money is what they're going to try and do. Not all of them. I mean, there's some, you know, there's a tendency now to think about the employees, because in the end, the employees are what creates value for the corporation. And if they kill them off or lose the institutional knowledge, you know, somebody that's worked there for a while gains expertise that can't be written down. It's intrinsic value that's in their intuitions that they develop. And I would like to see, I think when you're talking about the younger generations, I know people in Gen Z are starting to not have a mindless fealty to capitalism, where they're not hearing the word socialism and having a fit and trying to you know, end it and things like that. And I've got actually a book right here. It's the kind of economics that we learn in business school or in economics courses, rational choice economics. And the whole idea is that we're all in it for ourselves, and that the way you can understand economies is the aggregate of people working in their own best interests. So whatever we do, we're trying to optimize how the money that we have is spent. And that's the way that we think of economics. But it can be shown, I mean, there's a whole field called economic sociology. And the idea is that besides that, we're also making decisions based on how they influence our community and how they influence our friends and how they influence our families and things like that. We're not just making rational decisions. And my friend of mine at Stanford, who teaches this in his freshman course, right at the beginning, he asks everybody, he said, "Do you leave tips? Would you leave a tip even if the service wasn't that good? Would you leave a tip at a place that you're never going to go to again, in a town you're never going to be in again?" He says, "Why would you do that? That's not a rational choice. That's not maximizing your economics. Why are you doing that?" He said, "What would you take care of your aging parents?" And people are like, "Of course, you know." But what if you're not going to inherit anything from them? It's just going to cost you money and time. And there's never going to be any benefit to you. They're not even going to live that long. I mean, why would you do that? And everybody just kinds of realizes the decisions that we make are not just about economics. We're embedded in a society that even if it's not explicit, we intuitively realize that if the society's better off, we're better off. But we've been basically brainwashed into not believing that in the United States. And this particular book explains exactly how that happened. It was the Rand Corporation and others, explicitly created this model of economics that where they wanted to be scientific, and they didn't have a way of measuring or desire of measuring things like happiness and social well-being and things like that. So they reduced it all to just money, and that's become, to me, like the core of why we can't do what we want to do. Because I lived in Finland, and people there are perfectly happy to pay taxes. It doesn't bother them at all. And in the United States, if you consider what we have to spend on medical care, a tax, because in Finland you pay to the government, but you don't have to pay for medical care. But if you start adding all the things that they don't have to pay for in Finland, to be realistic, because we do have to pay for them, they actually pay less in Finland than we do in the United States. So
at what point? Because
I've been talking too much. I'd love to hear you.
Well, I like hearing the different things from Finland, because I've heard it throughout the years that there's different countries that see money and beings different than here in the US. Okay, so I learned at a very young age, because of the teachings and learning business from a wealthy person, that money was just energy, and it only had the value that I gave it. That my time is money. Money is energy. Energy is what the being produces, kind of thing. And so my whole mentality has been different, but I've had to unlearn a lot of things. But there's certain, when I coach CEOs and business owners and things like that, I can tell the difference in the people who fully see money as energy, and time is energy, art is energy. Anything that we create is energy. Anything I pay attention to, I'm giving energy there. I'm paying money to that, in essence, kind of thing. So having to learn, I can see the difference in businesses that see their employees as investments instead of a liability. And so on some, not everybody in America sees it like that. Not everybody in the world sees it like that. I think that's an individual thing that people have to come into or be taught at some level, that, hey, you're valuable. Because you're alive, you're valuable, you're worth something. But due to a lot of the trauma that people endure just by being alive as a human, I mean, that's a whole other topic. But it's like, on some level, people think they're just a number, or they're told they're just a number. But I feel like that there's a balance between capitalism, because I live in America. I love nice things. I love to get my hair done. I love to get my nails done. I love nice things. But I'm also a realist, and I'm also just a simplistic person. I don't have a lot of things. I enjoy nice things, but I don't hoard things. I'm a giver. I pay things forward. I leave more than enough tip. I feel like if I'm investing in my community, it's going to invest back into me. That's how my world works. But you got to have capitalism and socialism. I don't think it's either or, but I'm not even sure that it's both. I think there's a separate thing that needs to happen. That's my view of things. It's like, I work really hard to kind of unwind the stories of what I've been taught, because I was taught history and science and economics and all this in a very small town outside of Atlanta. So it's like, I'm not sure they have all the truth. I love hearing different things from different cultures and piecing things together, because the international trade per se, it's amazing, but people have to be able to value each human, each country the same somehow. And to me, that's not socialism. That is um, a way of viewing just people in general, that everything has value. And if it doesn't, then what value do you put on it? You know what I'm saying? So, and that gets into a whole other realm of topics, but um, I think I'm done right now.
Well, I agree. And if you ask the Finns, they'll tell you that that's a capitalist country. And so there's a kind of an idea of capitalism with guardrails, because in the United States, we've gotten to the point that there's 20,000 people, 20,000 who donate something like 60% of the money to political campaigns. I mean, that's wrong. We don't have a democracy when that's happening. We have and so in the last kind of boom, almost all of the money, this huge amount of money, trillions of dollars, trillions and trillions of dollars, went to the top 0.1%, and the rest of it was distributed, most of it went to the top, like 1 or 2 or 3%, almost all of it, and the bottom 50%, it went down. So we've got this system where money is being taken from the lower people and given to the higher people. And in fact, this year taxes are going up on people that make under $20,000 a year, and they're going down on people that make millions of dollars a year. And so there's got to be, and I'll just kind of finish this up because I want to hear what you say, but in Finland, if a wealthy person gets a traffic ticket for speeding, they make a fine relative to their income, their wealth. So a very wealthy person will get a speeding ticket and it'll be $50,000. But a normal person gets a speeding ticket and it'll be $100, because what they're trying to do is, make the fine be a disincentive to speeding. But for somebody that's a billionaire, what's a $500 fine to them? I mean, absolutely nothing. And so they try and that's not socialism at all. That's not,
No.
that's not the government owning the means of production. It's just a matter of figuring out ways to make capitalism balanced.
Okay, so, and I have different views on a lot of things. So I'm an emotional intelligence person. That's how I rule my life. And so my understanding from the United States, is that we were taking, before America was even created, that the founding fathers came in and wanted to take the best of the best of everything in the world and piece it together and make something of it. That's a very simplistic way that I see it. Okay. So when I go back and I think of, they were high-level Masons, they were Hermetics, because that's the founding fathers. That's what a 33-degree Mason is. They're a Hermetic. And so they understand how life works and energy, and they talk on mastery terms. That's not an everyday kind of term for everybody. So aside from that, so if that's true, then there's many people out there, and I don't want to say, it may be the ones who govern us, and everybody has a different view of what that is. I don't see that as a bad thing. At some point, someone had to have the vision of whatever we're doing here, whether it's on a country level, on a planet level, whatever it is. Someone had the vision. What is that vision? Okay. But then if you look at it and you look at, I think we're up to what, 8 billion people on the planet now. We used to be 7.5 billion. I think we're closer to 8 billion now, the last I heard. So if that's true, there's different levels of people. There is a whole teaching, I'm not saying I believe that, but there's a lot of people I've worked in city government. I've worked with higher level people, and they have these beliefs that, people who live in certain areas aren't worth as much because they don't produce as much. They are dependents on and they see it on an earth level. They're dependents on the planet. So then we've got to take care of them. So when you're talking about, the different fines and incentivizing people or decentivizing people depending on how much they produce, I get where they're coming from, because I'm the kind of person that can see things from all different views. But my question would be, because I want to develop people, I believe that people have the intrinsic nature in them to become the very best self. So if that's true, then how do we incentivize and teach different people at different levels to produce more? And my thinking is, you've got to teach them that their value is more, because I think if people value themselves and are taught that they're valuable, then they're going to produce more. That's been my experience teaching kids, teaching adults, teaching older people. It doesn't matter the age. It depends on how they view themselves. So, is it right
Well,
or
I
wrong?
understand.
Is it right or wrong? I don't know.
Well, I think that kind of in a way we're saying the same thing, because like in most of the world, the developed world, higher education is free. So I got my master's degree in Finland, and it didn't cost me anything. And so, and I'm considering finishing my PhD there, and it doesn't cost anything. They paid me. And that's the same in Germany. It's the same in England. It's the same in most countries
It is
in the
not
world.
that here.
Yeah, and I consider, and exactly what you said is that they invest in people. And I lived in a town called Oulu, and Oulu was the research and development headquarters for Nokia. And then Nokia, had to change what it did drastically. It stopped really making phones because it lost out. And so they had all these thousands and thousands of people who were total experts at the electronics of making phones. In fact, the first people to commercialize cell phones was Finland. And so we had them in the US military, but they bought the patents and refined it in a way so that they were cheap enough for people to actually have them. And that was Nokia that did that. So that's basically Finnish innovation. And all of a sudden, all these people were out of work. And what they did is they created training courses, and they paid them unemployment so that nobody, wound up on the streets and, without medical care and all the what would happen to you in the United States or us in the United States if we lost our job for too long is pretty serious. But in Finland, but it was never with the intention of having them just have a free ride forever. The Finns nobody really wanted to do that themselves because they're not contributing to society, which they think is very important. And it's also, demeaning. And so they went into these training courses, and they wound up, now Nokia is a infrastructure company, telecom infrastructure company. It still exists, but it does different things now. So they took these people and retrained them so that they do other things. They have a huge investment in entrepreneurship. at one time there was more companies being created in Helsinki than all of Europe. I mean, they're the Finns or something. So they took all these people who were, out of the company, and there's training courses in innovation and how to start companies and all this kind of stuff. And it works for them. I mean, they keep going. And I mean, they're just an example, because a lot of countries are doing the same thing and we're not. And I think it's exactly what you're saying, is that the question gets to be, is what does a value mean? And I think that somebody who makes great music is valuable. I mean, I rarely if ever listened to Taylor Swift's music, and I'd sort of like a chance to, I'm actually making myself do that a little bit, because she is an incredibly good businesswoman and a really great human being. And that's art. That's a cultural production. And what did she make, $8 billion on her last tour or something like that? But then she paid her road crew $50 million, and every city that she was into in San Francisco, she gave them enough money to feed 500,000 people, and just, she's just been going around doing stuff like that. And so if we just think of what corporations can produce, we kind of limit ourselves, because entrepreneurs in all kinds of fields they're doing things that we can't imagine. And that's how things get better, is when people go out and do stuff like that. So I like your metaphor of energy. That's a great metaphor. But we just have to.
Well, I was told,
and I think,
in my 20s, that there are no nouns, only verbs. So everything is alive. And so to me, I even saw corporations that way. And there are some things that are dead, completely dead. There is no life in them. It sucks the life out of everybody. Even if they're paying money to people, it still makes them sick. Like, I've worked with all kinds of people like that. But there's some corporations, and it may be in the name. I understand contract law, I understand jurisdiction, I understand all of that. So it may be in the wording of it. Some corporations are dead, some are alive. Some benefit humanity, some completely take away from humanity. That opens up a whole different can of worms there. However, I think there's a balance that we're trying to create in the United States. I'm seeing it everywhere. There's people call it different things, whether it's disclosure or Armageddon, or everybody has their own view of it. But there's more and more information coming out. More people are understanding what's going on. They're self-correcting. They don't have to be forced to change for the better. Some people, you may have to, you have to. I don't think that you can put laws in to make someone better. It's a sad state when we have to do that. If people can't just do the right thing. But then you got to remember, we've got different cultures, we've got different religions, we've got different things going on in this small space that we have, and everybody thinks that what they're doing is right. I truly want to believe that people only do the best that they can with what they know. It's hard for me to believe that there's just truly evil people there. I'm an ancestral therapist, so everybody learns something from somewhere. Where did it come from? We've got to rewind before we can move forward. People don't want to do that, though, because it makes people very uncomfortable. But that's where we have to start having conversations, because it gets to the point. And I live in Georgia. It's I don't want to say exactly where, in case people are listening, but there's still some backwoods people around here. They still believe that there's no dinosaurs because dinosaurs were before Christ. Like, that makes no sense when you break things down. But there's truly a bunch of people who still believe those things. But as an ancestral therapist and as an energy person, I know that beliefs can change. You got to unpack it. You got to find out where the voices come from. and then you can expand your mind. But until then, I mean, I said that because when you have such closed beliefs, when people do, they don't want to trade with anybody outside their little neighborhood. You know, they think other cultures are coming in and taking their jobs, taking our guns. Like, to me, that's just weird to me. Like, I mean, people make a lot of jokes about those things, but these people are still living. And that, to me, is not okay. Should they have the same rights as other people? I kind of go back and forth with that. You know,
It's funny.
I'm laughing.
It's interesting that you say that, because I lived for a year in Arkansas back long enough ago when they still had separate restrooms for colored people.
Yes.
And they had to sit on the back of the bus and all that kind of stuff. And so I know how it gets down there in the South.
Right.
One time I hitchhiked from Miami to Santa Cruz and got picked up by some very, very interesting people and who told me their beliefs. And so it's interesting that you say that, because the research that I've done is with social networks, and the name of social network was used for 100 years before it got hijacked by websites. So now people say social network and they think of Facebook or something like that. But when I'm talking about, if you go even to Google Scholar and you search for social network, you'll get sociology and anthropology, and that's where it came from. And it's the idea of the kind of closed networks we have that make us who we are. And you were talking about, where do people get information? Well, you get it, think about it. You get it from the people around you. And if you have a completely different opinion than somebody around you, you're going to get pushback from the people around you. They're going to be, well, that's wrong. Why are you thinking that? That doesn't make any sense. So the easy thing to do, and everything
is to go with the
that
crowd.
we're not, and everything we're not directly connected to, we have to imagine. So if you've never been to New York City, you have to imagine New York City. And to you, New York City is what you imagine. And you want to learn more about it. You talk to your friends and they tell you something, and you develop this view. And so that's one of the things that is the problem with the international thing, is people make up the other, the people. Like, there was this whole thing about our ex-president was calling Mexicans murderers and rapists. Well, in California, we love the Mexican immigrants. They're part of our world. Where I live in Silicon Valley, white people like me are a minority. I mean, we're 1/3. And then if and I'm a man, so if we separate men and women because they have such different opportunities and different challenges, then I'm 1/6. And there's we just visited Ohio and Michigan and some of those places there, and there are a lot of African Americans there, but they're incredibly segregated. They live in their part of town, and the white people live in their part of town, and they don't really mix. So you can go there and not see anybody from a different race at all. And but yet this research I worked on at Stanford is we studied how the fact of the interchange for people, the different social networks. So people who are from India have this way, when they come from India, they have family and friends here that help them get established and get a job and so on. Chinese, same thing, whatever. But yet they all work together. It's the same company, and more companies are started by Indians and Chinese than anything else in Silicon Valley. And so, I worked for a company that I was a minority. Everybody else was Indian. The majority were Indians. And so you get to learn, wow, Indians are really different. I mean, there's people don't even, one part of India don't even like people from another part of India. So it isn't like they're one thing at all. And you get to learn that. But they've all got different food and different stories and different gods and all this amazing stuff. If you're just open to it, it's so wonderful. And so I really agree with what you're saying. And the one thing I say sometimes is that in order to change who you are, you have to change where you are in some senses.
Yes.
So I think somebody from one of those small towns in Georgia, if they were forced to live in New York City for 2 or 3 years, or Finland, like I did, they'd never be the same. They could not
Right.
be the same. And so
Well,
I think that's
I
pretty
was
cool.
adopted by my aunt and uncle. I was adopted by my aunt and uncle from Texas, moved to Georgia. It was my mom's sister and her husband. And so I went from a city, I always joke about, city mouse, country mouse kind of thing, because then I say implanted in North Georgia on a chicken farm. So then I picked up eggs and milked a couple of cows, and we had pigs, and we lived the farm life kind of thing. But I was on the run from the moment I stepped foot there. But that, they gave me this loving home that I didn't have before. But I think there was one or two Black families. That's it. There was no other. I graduated in 1992 with 73 people. And I think they were all kin except for me. Not really, but I mean, just a very small town, and everybody knew everybody. And I think I was the only person with dark hair and blue eyes. Like, everybody looked at me like I was an alien because I looked different, because everybody else who had blue eyes had blonde hair. That was not me. And so, of course, that's, my view of it growing up. But it was, as soon as I could get out and go to a different town, then I'm like, wow, oh, the Mexican restaurant's coming in. So then we've got the Mexican family, and then we've got the Asian, the Chinese restaurants coming in. Then we've got the Asian family. And then these people are trying to come to our church. And then we've got this pastor that says, unequally yoked means you you don't date the Blacks. Well, now we have other races. Well, what do you say about that? Like, it's like, the perception of people was so small and kept changing and kept changing and kept changing. And then when I moved in closer to Atlanta, it was a melting pot, and I loved it. I studied different religions. I dated different cultures. I, became friends. I was like, the only way to really get into a culture is to, break bread with them. Why do you believe what you believe? Why do you think? Why do you do? Why do you dress this way? Why do you act this way? Why did you say that? And so I became, this person who was just absorbing these things. And the more I did that, the more I realized we were all the same. It was like we just all want the same thing. We want to be loved. We want to be respected. We want to just be able to be comfortable in our skin. We want to, enjoy life. We want clean water. We want to be able to take a warm shower. I mean, nobody wanted anything different than what I wanted. And I loved that. So then I made sure that my kids had, experiences as well, to where they understood. But I think the more people live within cities and they see, hey, the value of everybody is the same, if you can truly see it like that. And then to get back to the international trade, hey, America is a great example of a melting pot of international things, creating different things. How we move forward and what we're going to do on a global scale, I'm not sure yet. I look at America and think, gosh, we just need to focus here. I'm still kind of confused. Why do we send billions of dollars to different countries when we have people who are homeless and starving and all that here? Like, that still doesn't make sense to me. It's like, I've done some family counseling throughout the years. So it's like, I think of, okay, you got to have a vision here. You got to start at home. What's home doing first? We can't think about everybody else until we really fix our borders and our home and what's going on here. And then we can say, hey, we know what we're doing. So here, let's help you. It's hard for me to think of the leadership that we have here in America and what's going on and say, oh, well, Africa's this or Finland's this or, whatever, we're better. No, we're not. I'm not sure that we are. It's almost like a, maybe a terrible example, but I'm gonna use it anyway. It's like, missionaries going into different countries, taking Jesus, thinking he wasn't already there. Well, no, he's been there the whole time. You're just taking a different view of Jesus there, making it a little bit different than what it was. The beauty of earth and, God, whatever you want to call that, has been everywhere at all times. It's the view that's changed over time, or the interpretation of things, or you get the economics in it, or the capitalism, or the different ways of governing. I'm definitely not a proponent of going back to the farm and everybody doing their own thing. I think that we've built this amazing world of business and trade and possibility and creating different things and higher technologies, and there's so much out there. It's hard for me to believe that, hey, everything's going to crash down and burn and we're just going to have to grow our own food again. Like, yeah, that's not the game I want to play.
Well, I think you make a good point. I want to say, in defense of sending money to other places, they send money to us too. And that's the thing about trade, is that's really people sending money back and forth to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so
it's a form of investment. And it does make sense, because it gets back to what you had said. It's like people are going to invest in the areas that's going to give them the most return. But on some level, we got to get back to the value, because I don't think that it's fair, for us to have these. I worked for Nordstrom at one point in my life. And so I remember getting these sweaters. They were, this special sweater that we had for Christmas or something. It was a cashmere sweater. And when I was opening the boxes, I got pricked by a needle, and I panicked, because I was like, oh my God, where did these sweaters come from? So of course, because I knew enough about disease and spreading of stuff. I wanted to make sure that needle had not been in someone else, kind of thing. But then I looked through the box, and those needles, it looked like all the buttons on the sweater were hand sewn on. There was like a needle with some extra thread in every single sweater. And so then I went to HR and I was like, well, where did these needles come from? Because me being me, the energy person I am, as soon as I was pricked with this needle, it was like I was transported to this other country and this factory kind of thing. And so I had it was like the very first time in my life that I realized, oh my God, there's people in other countries. It's not a machine making these things. There's people making things. And then I started thinking, oh my God, what are they getting paid? What's the conditions that they're working in? And so when I went to HR, they couldn't give me any information, and just basically was shutting me down, saying, don't you worry about it. Let's give you let's send you to the nurse, get you some tests to make sure you're okay, but then go back to work, kind of thing. Well, I couldn't let it go. I did all kinds of research, because these sweaters were made in, I don't even remember, some other country, something I'd never even heard of before. I'm going to say Indonesia, but I doubt that that's it. But somewhere like that. So I started doing some research on that, and then come to find out they were making like 45 cents an hour or something to make these sweaters. And I'm not going to have all the facts of that, but you understand what I'm saying. It's like they're this very small pocket of people making these sweaters. And at this store, we were selling them for $199. Well, then I found out it was the exact same sweater that was going into 2 other very high-end stores that year. And they were selling them for $300, $400, and $500 for that one sweater that someone was making for that. You see what I'm saying? And I was like, the value. And then that's when I started hearing about sweatshops and the, kids working and things like that. Like that started really bothering me, but not to the point where, oh, I'm not going to trade. Oh, I'm not going to buy anything at Walmart anymore. You know, it wasn't to that extent, but it started making me really, really think. And then I started talking to my kids and started talking to my neighbors, and they're like, oh, Rebecca, you just think too much. I'm like, no, y'all need to fully understand how this trade stuff works. What's a responsible trade? What about, it goes back to the value. What does something really cost? And why do we have to inflate it so high? And why can't we value the work put in if we're going to be able to enjoy it over here? That's the thing. It's like I've sown things in my life, and it takes a lot of time and energy and creative power to sow. And it's not cheap to do so. It's cheaper to buy it at Walmart or Macy's. It just is. Why is that? Because here in America, if I was to sew, and I used to sew pocketbooks and little dresses for my daughter, and if I was to, buy the material that I like and then come home and sew it here, use 1 or 2 hours of my time to make something, I know what my time's valued. And when I get on a counseling and coaching level, nobody's going to pay me $600 for a pocketbook that I made. Nobody's going to do that because it's a very simple thing. That's just not realistic. And the time and energy it's put in, it just doesn't make much sense. So, the answer to that, do we value everybody's time at the same? Do we, but then it gets back to the people who's producing, the people who have cultivated skills. I can, as a coach and a counselor, I've cultivated skills, and I can work with someone on a mastery level and they only have to see me 2 or 3 times. You go to someone, a beginner person, you're going to have 6 months to a year before they even get to the point that I'm starting you at, kind of thing. That's the difference. And people don't fully understand that, especially if it gets into more of life experiences versus degrees. Where do we value that at? Everybody values that a little bit different as well. So fair trade.
Well, I hope you come
What
on
is
the
that?
show more often because we discuss that a lot. Sharif's thing is education, and so we think a lot about what we can do to take a country like Bangladesh, which is a very likely place for that sweater to have come from. They do a lot of making clothes, so it's very common in the United States to find clothes that were made in Bangladesh, where Dr. Sharif lives, and so we think a lot about it. The cost of living there is so much lower that the wage scales you have to change them to make them somehow relative, but even so, I mean, even in the United States, I mean, how much would a house cost in North Georgia, and how much does a house cost in Silicon Valley? And so then if you hear of salaries in Silicon Valley, like somebody's basically lower middle class if they're making $120,000 a year. But if you were making $120,000 in North Georgia, you'd be like, you buy a giant house and have servants.
You'd probably beat the mayor.
Yeah, and so it's hard to make those comparisons, but I totally understand what you're saying and agree with it. That and the thing that I think is, I'm trying to figure out the right way to say it, but we're doing a kind of international trade right now in this show, because this show goes all over South Asia, and actually farther than that. We get people from I forget, but there's one person that comes very, very, very frequently is in Europe, and we have people in this show, and so we're exporting ideas. And the one thing that I want to say is the United States was developed by people who did the very best, like you said, took the very best from what they knew hundreds of years ago. And I like to think that in those ensuing hundreds of years, we've learned something and that we could improve on what they did. And for an instance, at the time, the Black people weren't allowed to vote at all, or women. Women weren't even allowed to have credit cards until the 70s. I mean, it's not like our country's very progressive in that respect. In Finland, the prime minister is a woman and her cabinet is all women under 35.
Wow.
And if you look at the world right now, the happiest country in the world is, guess, Finland. Yeah, and the other Nordic countries,
they're governed by women.
Yeah, well, as you well know, companies, the corporations that have women as their CEOs actually make more profit and do better than companies that are run by men. So women are actually, I mean, objectively better leaders. But that's neither that, and that's something Sharif works on a lot too. And something that Bangladesh has done somewhat better than a lot of developing countries is that they've really managed to have women be part of the workforce and be entrepreneurs, and it's been an amazing help to the country. And so I think that's something
that's awesome.
That's a case of exporting ideas and exporting. And that's something that we need to import too. Women in when I teach in Finland, my classes, engineering classes, more than at least half women, and the women in Finland are they do things to make it more reasonable, like very robust maternal leave. They share it with the father, so the father gets paternal leave too, so they can work together and make things work out in a really healthy way. And it works out. I mean, people, it gets boring sitting at home with your kids all the time. People are perfectly happy to go out and work. I mean, it'd be great to have your husband stay home and take care of them for a while you went out and did something interesting and interacted with people. So and we could learn that. And I think the thing about the bigger fines is, the point is that if all of the money in the United States is owned by a handful of people, then we don't have that money to put people through school, to have health care, to have all those kinds of things. So their tax rate is a lot more progressive in Finland. So the richest people in America, the richest people have the lowest taxes, but in Finland they have a progressive thing where very rich people pay more taxes. And so they have the money available to them, but it doesn't stop business. I mean, they have very, very successful companies there in some industries, the biggest biggest companies in the world in those industries, and they're very into entrepreneurship, and so there's lots and lots of people that start companies and can be very successful. So that they're not mutually exclusive in any way. But and again, I like the idea that there's not just international trade in things, but also international trade in ideas and processes and all the kinds of things that we can do. And just to finish what I'm saying, I mean, the country of Bhutan measures their gross national happiness rather than their gross national product. So instead of measuring what their output is in terms of money, they measure their output in terms of success for humans, like how well humans are doing. And Finland does this to some extent, and more people are starting to do that. And I think those are things that we actually can do that can work everywhere.
That's beautiful.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. This is really great discussion, and hopefully we can do some collaboration and do real type of international trade. Thank you, Mr. Donald, and thank you, Madam Rebecca. Hopefully you will join another session of World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Wonderful meeting you. I hope to see you again.
Yes. Same here.
Yes, same here.